we've been talking a lot about how the pandemic has highlighted the frayed and torn nature of our social contract. The web that is supposed to bind us together is shot full of holes. And this week saw the reenactment of an annual ritual among those, I would argue, who don't fully support that social contract, and that is the release every year of the Social Security trustees annual report. Now, in years past, this has been an occasion for fretting or performative fretting on the part of those who say, geez, we just can't afford to maintain the contract we have with the American people among ourselves to take care of ourselves. But here to talk about that trustees report and perhaps the broader implications of what's going on now is a person I think who understands this better than anyone else I know. Nancy Altman is the president of Social Security Works. She is also a longtime activist, policymaker, and thinker and writer in this area. She's written a number of books on it, and she has looked into this report in greater depth, and we're going to start there. So first of all, Nancy Altman, welcome back to the program.
So much for having me.
Always a pleasure. And before we get into the potential for performative hand-wringing, what does this year's Social Security's trustees report actually say?
Well, let me give a little bit of context, and then I'll tell you exactly what it says. Congress has required this report. It's in the law. It's required. It's supposed to come out April 1, although that deadline often slips. But it comes out every year. And it should give the American people confidence, because what it is the board of trustees that have control of they're the legal owners of the monies we contribute for Social Security. They report to Congress every year about the financial status and operation of Social Security. It came out during World War II. It came out during the Korean War. It came out during the Great Recession. It's coming out during this pandemic. It comes out every single year and should give the American people confidence. What it shows is that Social Security is extremely well financed. Despite this pandemic, benefits are going to continue to be paid every month, just as they were through the Great Recession. They will, and it shows that Social Security and expanded Social Security is extremely affordable. At the very end of it, the program has a $2.9 trillion surplus. And at the end of this century, in 2095, it will cost only a little bit more than it costs today.
So, the reason why some people might be surprised at that answer that you just gave, which is that Social Security is affordable, expanding Social Security is affordable, is that every year this report comes out. Every year people say, oh, they start tearing their hair in 2033 or 2034. We can't pay 100% of the benefits that have been offered to the American people now. We're in trouble. We have to cut Social Security. We have to further shred the social contract. But you're saying something very different, Nancy Altman. You're saying that, in fact, this is good news, and we can afford not only to maintain Social Security, but to give better and more adequate benefits than we give today. Why the disparity? Why do we are we constantly exposed to such a different perspective, and what accounts for the difference?
Well, let me tell you the sort of technical answer and then the ideological answer. The technical answer is that when you project out 75 years, which is what the trust fund, what the trustees report does every single year. It's why it comes out every year, because it projects out so far. And they're going to, obviously, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have predicted this pandemic. You just can't predict everything that's going to happen. So when you project out that far, it's understandable that occasionally you'll have an unintended surplus or you'll have an unintended shortfall, and you'll have to adjust that. But for most people, if you were told, look, you can pay every penny of all your expenses, you will not have to borrow any money, you won't be in debt, you can pay every penny of your expenses for a decade and a half until 2035. And after that, you'll be able to pay 80%, but you'll still, you'll have to figure out how to make that up that 10% difference. You'd go, wow, that's pretty good. And that's what Social Security is. It's 91% funded for the next 25 years. That's the technical answer. There is a shortfall that's projected, very manageable in size, and more than a decade, about a decade and a half away. And Congress does have to act and should act. And in fact, if the Democrats were in power, they would act. The ideology is that Social Security is extremely popular across the spectrum of views, the ideological spectrum. Tea Partiers agree with union members about this, that Social Security is more important than ever, that we shouldn't be cutting it, we should be expanding it. For decades, opponents of this program tried to cut it by saying it's socialism and all of that. They lost. So now they say, we love it, but we can't afford it. That is the playbook.
So I guess if I were to summarize that answer, Nancy Altman, it's first of all, when you're projecting out this far, we can't possibly predict all the little permutations that might make 91%, 110% or whatever, but also that, and nor should we necessarily, because we should view it in the light of, there's some variation here, and what can we do to make sure we meet and exceed our goals, rather than how do we use it as naysaying. And then the other piece of it is the ideological, that of course they're going to jump on this as a way to make an argument that is politically unpopular by pretending it's a technical argument, right?
Yeah, and let me be clear. We should take the projections seriously. That's why they're provided. And there are a number of plans in Congress that expand Social Security and fully fund it through the rest of the century. But what we shouldn't do is say, oh, we're afraid there's going to be a shortfall 15 years ago, so let's cut the benefits now. Now there's a surplus. Now we've got a $2.9 trillion surplus that, and there was more income than outgo this year. So it makes no sense it makes no sense to cut these benefits anyway, because they are extremely modest and extremely important in times like the pandemic. But it certainly makes none to, it's a destroy the village to save it kind of logic to say we should cut it now to avoid cuts in the future.
So you said something very interesting, Nancy Altman. You said that this report, when viewed correctly, and not only shows that we can afford to continue Social Security, but that we can afford to expand it. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Absolutely. The goal of this program is to provide economic security to the American people. It is wage insurance that provides benefits in the event of disability, death, leaving dependents, and old age. Its benefit levels are modest by virtually any standard. They are, in absolute terms, they're only about $15,000 a year on average, which means an awful lot of people are getting below that amount. They are low by international standards, what other industrialized countries pay. They are low by the amount of salary earnings that it replaces. And that's the whole point of this program, of Social Security, is to replace your earnings. So the benefit levels are too low. But in addition, when it was created in 1935, those who were working on it tried to push through guaranteed universal health insurance. They tried disability, both short-term and long-term. We got the long-term disability in 1956. We couldn't get universal health insurance, but we got a start, which was Medicare for seniors and people with disabilities as a first step. And we never got short-term disability. Think where we would be today without, and unemployment insurance was part of the Social Security Act, because that also is insurance, wage insurance. Think where we'd be today without Social Security, without unemployment insurance, without Medicare and Medicaid. And think where we would be if we already had paid family leave, paid sick leave. We should really be, and so that's the way the program should be expanded. And as I say, at the end of the century, it costs only 6% of gross domestic product. There's no question we can afford we just spent on this, the third bill, the CARES Act, was that $2.5 trillion. That was 10% of GDP. We're talking about over the next 75 years, increasing spending by a tenth of that amount, spread out over a long time and across the whole population. So there's no question we can afford it if that's what we want. If this is a matter of values, not affordability.
So I think that's well said. And again, we're talking with Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works. And since you bring up the present situation, I wish we had certain things in place that, including, a single payer health system, which would have mitigated the impact of this and certainly would help people vastly right now in the moment. But we've got the history we have, not the history we might have wished for. And with that in mind, there's a lot of talk about getting aid directly to people, as opposed to through corporations and these sort of, to me, Rube Goldberg contraptions that we're trying to build that are going to benefit corporations and not individuals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me, Nancy Altman, that just thinking in terms of responding to the present moment, one, we got to get money to people, directly to people, and two, it seems to me we have the infrastructure to do it with the Social Security Administration. We have the data, but I'd love your thoughts on that. Can we use the structure in place, or can we adapt it? And shouldn't we be talking about that, if we can, to help people survive in this moment of crisis?
Absolutely. Not only can we should. I mean, here's some background and a little bit, and I will tell you where I'm going to say this. A little bit is hearsay, something I've heard. So, take that with a grain of salt. It may not be accurate, but when I heard it, I thought, okay, that explains a lot. Congress, as part of that CARES Act, enacted $1,200 for everyone with incomes. It phases out, but you get the full amount if you have income $75,000 or less. Children were to receive $500. Now, the government is already paying monthly benefits to Social Security beneficiaries, 64 million of them, to SSI recipients, 8 million of them, and to veterans getting veterans pensions. Those are monies that go out every month. We know their direct deposit. We know their debit cards, however the money is transferred to them. That's the easy part, would be to get them their $1,200. And all of the SSI and veterans, those are means tested programs. So there's no question they fit the income limit. Social Security beneficiaries, they have all that information. Most of them, a large majority of them, are just above poverty. And this is the part where rumor and hearsay comes in. They decided, instead of just sending it out the way the Social Security Administration always does, let Social Security Administration take the lead in that, and the VA for the veterans. They said, nope, Treasury's got to take the lead. I asked someone, why did they set it up that way? And what I was told, I don't know if this is accurate, was they didn't want the Democrats to be able to claim that they were expanding Social Security. So instead, they're doing this through Treasury, but Congress anticipated that and put in the law explicit ability for the Social Security Administration and the VA to share with Treasury the information, since they can do it automatically. The first step, the Trump administration said, nope, all these people have to go online in the middle of this pandemic. You've got people who are seniors, people with disabilities, who are the most important for them to practice social distancing. To the extent they use computers in libraries, all libraries are closed. To the extent they have their children come and help them with these kinds of things, their children have to keep their distance from it's just crazy. So the first step was they had to all go online and file. And we pushed back very hard on that, and so did Democratic members of the House and Senate, and the uproar got so loud that they reversed on that. So they will get the $1,200 automatically. But here's the crazy part. With Social Security, you get dependents benefits. You know how many children each of these people have. So if you're disabled and you have 2 children, you should be getting the $2,200, not $1,200. And the government has that information. But just last Monday night around 5 p.m., an alert came out from IRS that said, okay, if you're going to get that amount for your children, if you receive Social Security and you don't otherwise file taxes, and most people don't, you can get that $1,000. But what you have to do is file before 9 a.m. Pacific time Wednesday, 2 days, before the show is being recorded. So they gave them a little more than 24 hours. And if you don't do that, you don't get your money until 2021. This is supposed to be an emergency payment. So
yeah, it's preposterous. Yeah, it's absolutely preposterous. Unfortunately, Nancy Altman, we're going to have to come to a break, but and end this. But in 30 seconds or so, I'm going to ask you whether you see in any of this crisis and the American people observing it a chance to renew the social contract. But it's got to be 30 seconds because we're running out of time. Well,
first, I want to give assurance that if you're receiving Social Security, it will keep coming month after month after month. Don't worry. It will be there. And yes, we all have to fight to make sure to pass it forward so the next generation has it better than we do in time at the next emergency, which we know will come.
Well said. And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. If you want to know more about Nancy's work, you can go to socialsecurityworks.org. And Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works, thanks for your insights on this. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Again, thank you so much for having me.